So last week I decided to check out Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith on the original Xbox. It was a pretty decent game, but in that video I mentioned how I really wanted to talk about Star Wars more on this channel. I also mentioned some other great games that came out in the prequel era of movies. One of those games I mentioned was Star Wars Episode 1 Racer for the Nintendo 64. Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace is a bit of a controversial movie. It did bring Star Wars back and introduce the Star Wars universe to an entirely new audience of people, and the film was an overwhelming success financially. However, fan opinion is mixed even to this day. Regardless of what you think of the movie, it did give us some pretty great action sequences like the final duel against Darth Maul, and my favorite scene, the pod race. The visuals, the sounds, the personalities. I loved this scene as a kid, and after rewatching it for this video, it was still my favorite part of the film. It has aged wonderfully, and it's incredible even by today's standards. So when I got the game for the Nintendo 64 as a kid, I was as giddy as one can be. As an adult, however, I unfortunately saw the flaws, and I'm going to get into those a bit later on in the video. Today's footage is going to be captured from the Nintendo 64 and PC versions of the game. It should be obvious which version of the game you're seeing, but I'm going to put a small logo in the top left corner of the screen to help with that. I also had some audio capture issues with the PC version, which shouldn't be an issue going forward, but for this video there will be sequences here and there where I'll have to put music over it. So without further delay, let's get into it. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer released on a plethora of platforms. First for the Nintendo 64 and Windows on May 18th, 1999. It later released for Mac on December 16th, 1999, and on the Dreamcast on April 4th, 2000. So the concept here is fairly straightforward. Sebulba, the crowd favorite and generally the fastest pod racer, has to be taken down a peg, and you're just the driver to accomplish this. Beyond the initial Star Wars scrolling text to explain the story, there really isn't anything else here to note as far as the story goes. It's light on story, and that's okay with me as far as racing games go. I think racing games sometimes try to add too much, but ultimately gameplay is king with these types of games, and I like how bare bones Racer was in that regard. Racer features 4 different championships for you to race across, amateur being the easiest, invitational being the hardest. Invitational races are only unlocked after you've completed each of the first 3 championships, so finish first in amateur and you will unlock the first invitational race, etc. Each championship outside of the invitational features 7 races in 7 different locations for you to race across. You'll start out at Tatooine, the location of the film scene in amateur, and race your way across different planets with their own different climates and environments. As you continue through the different championships, you'll notice that the same tracks from previous races will return with some variation. So for example, you might be racing on the reverse circuit the second time, or maybe they'll have a different pathway or shortcut on your third playthrough. It keeps the gameplay varied and really makes you stay on the top of your game. Before each race, you're able to choose a different pod racer, and each racer has a different look, personality, and most importantly, stats. These can range from acceleration, top speed, traction, boost, etc. You're really able to customize your pod however you see fit, which I really like. Watto returns from the film and you're able to buy and trade parts to equip onto your pod racer. Every stat is upgradable as long as you have enough credits. These credits come from winning races, and you can also customize how many credits you win exactly. You can go with a fair pool, an excellent pool, or a winner takes all pool. I wish I knew I could do this sooner because I was winning a crazy amount of races, but I had the payout set to excellent instead of winner takes all. Because of this, by the end of my playthrough, I didn't have enough money to fully upgrade my pod racer, but that's okay. I still was plenty fast, and you do have a decent roster to start the game with. I started with Anakin Skywalker just because he's the main character in the film scene, and I don't know, I thought it was cool to recreate that. As time goes on and as you complete races, you'll unlock more characters and they'll be immediately added to your roster for use. I enjoyed watching this little cutscene that played anytime you unlocked a new character. It really shows you just how huge these racing machines are. All of the pilots from the film return and are playable with varying stats and appearances. When you buy a part for one pod racer, you end up trading in your old one, and so you can then rebuy this part for another pod if you would like to. Personally, I didn't do this too much because as time went on, I found pods that I liked more than others, and I tended to stick with them. In addition to these upgrades, you're also able to take a look at your ship in the bay and get a good look at your pilot as well. Some of these characters made me laugh. They're really goofy looking. I mean, look at this guy right here. Does this not look like some kind of cursed Jar Jar Binks and Kirby hybrid? Bruh. There are more examples of weird and wacky characters, but for me, I was more impressed by the pods themselves. All of these generally have the same design with the driver in the back and the engines up front, but this dude right here was the opposite. Sometimes I would pick certain pilots just to see their pod racer in action. The game's controls are very responsive, snappy, and the sense of speed here is phenomenal. I loved pushing my pod racer to the limit, just figuring out where I needed to boost, brake, steer in, steer out. When you finally nail a troublesome corner, the feeling you get is truly amazing. If you're familiar with the FZ F-Zero or Wipeout games, I think you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to the speed. Objects will fly by you so fast and you'll be required to quickly react to not only turns, but to jumps or obstacles that are in your way like lava or rocks. If you damage your engine too much from contact, you'll have to repair it, and the health of your engines are shown down here on the hood. You'll have to hold the repair button to fix this, which will temporarily shut off that engine and compromise not only your speed, but also your turning ability. Alternatively, if you use the speed boost for too long, you risk lighting your engine aflame, which will also damage you over time, so you want to put that fire out as soon as possible. All of the levels feature shortcuts, which aren't always required early on in the game, but as you progress, you will want to use these if you want to win. Most of these will be far riskier than the main route, but will also save you precious seconds of your time. The AI will also use shortcuts, so even with a fully decked out pod racer, you will struggle to finish in a good position if you do not use these. Thankfully, most of the shortcuts are shown up here on the hood, as well as your opponent's locations on the track. It helps to give you an idea of what your opponents are doing and maybe what you should be doing to improve your times. The game has a lot to love, so where exactly does it falter? Well, there are a few things that hold this back for me, and I'd like to talk about them. On the N64 side of things, the game does chug a bit, and it hurts not only the snappiness of inputs, but also the general sense of speed. I have the expansion pack for the N64, so the textures are of a higher quality, but that does not improve the frame rate, sadly. There were many times where I was really struggling to get through levels with wider open areas and areas with lots going on, slowing the action down to a crawl. It makes the game difficult to play, especially when the speeds start to crawl upwards with later championships. I found myself banging off walls quite frequently, and it was starting to get frustrating. I'm just not used to these low frame rates anymore, and I find it difficult to commit to certain actions when the game is stuttering as badly as this is. Another issue of mine when it comes to Racer is the sound. The sound in the film is amazing. Each pod racer had its own unique sound, from Sebulba's bassy washing machine punch to Anakin's screaming F1 car. I'm a huge motorsports fan, and sound is a huge part of why I love motorsports. So playing Racer, you don't get a whole lot of engine and exhaust noise. Here's a short comparison between the movie and the game. Yeah, see what I mean? Most of what you're hearing in-game is wind, the sound of wind blowing across your pod racer. The only sounds you really get from the pod racer itself are when you activate boost or the sound of gears shifting. The excellent John Williams soundtrack from the movie returns, but this scene in the film is notable for not having music at all. I was so sad when I finally got to unlock Sebulba, but then his pod just sounded like everyone else's. It at first seemed to me like a limitation of the N64 hardware, but this issue carried over to the PC version as well, and is also an issue with the modern re-releases for Xbox, PlayStation, and the Switch. It's a bummer, a missed opportunity, but somehow still not my biggest issue with the game. My primary issue with Star Wars Episode 1 Racer is the difficulty, or rather, lack thereof. I can only speak on the N64 and PC versions of the game, these are the only ones I've played, but the PC version just seems like it's using the same AI difficulty as the N64. On the N64, the game is difficult, but it's only difficult if you wreck a bunch of times, which I admit I did kill myself many times bouncing off of walls. The PC version, however, is far too easy. I was purposely handicapping myself through the playthrough for as long as possible, and I didn't really start to struggle until about halfway through the third championship. I didn't upgrade any parts, rarely used any shortcuts, boosted only on straightaways, and chose the wrong pod racer for the circuit. So I'd pick someone with low traction on a course that clearly had a lot of winding pathways, for example. By this point in the story, I had accumulated a ton of credits, and I was able to buy some of the best upgrades in the game, and so the difficulty again plummeted. I found fun in Racer, but not as a player versus AI type game. I found fun in just trying to beat my own personal times, or trying to push the pod to its absolute limit, or discover new shortcuts that maybe I didn't notice before. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy doing yourself, then for sure I absolutely recommend this game. It's short, and the sense of speed really is something you need to experience yourself. I 100% finished the game on PC in about 3 hours, which yeah, is very short, but the game is pretty cheap these days, $10 on modern platforms and even less on retro platforms. games. I enjoyed my short time even though I wish it was more. The game did well enough to receive a PlayStation 2 exclusive sequel in 2002 called Star Wars Racer Revenge. Let me know if you'd like for me to cover it in an upcoming video. I've never played it and I'm definitely down to give it a shot. And now I turn it over to you. What's your favorite racing game and why is it your favorite? I would love to read your comments. I read and respond to every comment posted. And with that said, let's roll the outro. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate your support. This week I'm going to recommend my episode 3 video because, well, it's Star Wars. I'm also going to go ahead and recommend my Black review. It's a shooter, but it was made by racing game developer Criterion, who also made the Burnout series, so definitely check that one out. As always, have a good one.